the closest we've ever come in this country to a presidential election, because it's highly likely that if Burnham wins, he will become the next prime minister.
He is just Keir Starmer in a pair of jeans. Like, it's not, there really isn't much there.
Or a pair of running shorts.
Exactly. Oh God, the running shorts.
Tight little running shorts.
I wish I could have unseen that combination, but there we go.
If the Labour Party haven't woken up to the fact that they need to win this by genuinely acknowledging the sense out there that the country is broken, then frankly they deserve to be defeated.
Hope is in the air. Can you feel it? Yeah, definitely.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers and delighted to have back with me Spike's editor Tom Slater.
Hello.
And also thrilled to be welcoming Ameer Kotecha, former diplomat and CEO of the Centre for Government Reform. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming on the show. We have plenty to discuss today. We'll be talking about Burnham's tricky path to power, the return of the Brexit debate and the calamity of HS2. But before we get into all that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about an unmissable radio show. Now, everyone here at Spiked is a big fan of Rod Liddell, the Times columnist and returning Spike podcast guest, and I'm sure that you are too. If you're a fan, you need to listen to his Times radio show. Rod is on Times Radio every week from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m, so it's 3 hours of really spiky conversation with big-name guests confronting all the big issues, and you will not hear the usual line that you get everywhere else in the mainstream media. Plus, it's not all heavy lifting. There's music recommendations from leading artists and a TV review so you know what to watch and what to avoid. So don't miss Rod Liddell on Times Radio every Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m, and you can listen on your digital radio, via your smart speaker, or via the free Times Radio app. And Tom, we've got one more thing to remind people of before we get into the show.
No, exactly, which of course is the Spike Summit. This is your weekly reminder that our biggest event ever is coming up on Saturday, the 27th of June. We've announced a number of new speakers recently. Andrew Doyle is going to be there. Paul Embry is going to be there. Fayez Mughal is going to be there. It's going to be a fantastic day. If you haven't already got your tickets yet, move fast because we have very few left. It looks like we're going to sell out in a matter of days, if not weeks. So spiked-online.com/events. And remember, if you're a Spike supporter, you get that discount.
So a by-election is coming up on the 18th of June in Makerfield. This is Andy Burnham's potential chance to get into Parliament and possibly depose Keir Starmer. He has declared it the most important and significant by-election of our lifetimes. I mean, he would say that. It's about his career. But Tom, it's not all smooth sailing for Andy Burnham. Despite him being a popular figure in the Labour Party, this is a difficult seat for him to win.
No, absolutely. I mean, the bookies have it as about 50-50 as to whether or not Labour will win it, which is remarkable given that Labour have always held this seat. It's really... the reason it's so significant, I think, is because it's the ongoing story of the realignment of British politics. This is firmly a kind of red wall seat, voted heavily for Brexit, and also at the recent local elections voted very heavily for reform. They took about 50% of the local council seats going in the area. So it's going to be a real test, obviously, of the Labour Party and the extent to which it can hold on to some of those working class red wall voters that it managed to hold on to or claw back at the last election. But also for Andy Burnham in particular, is his supposed personal brand so strong, obviously within Greater Manchester itself, that it can overcome not only the terrible inheritance of the short Starmer period, but also of the longer term kind of tectonic shifts in our politics, which has led a lot of particularly white working class voters in places like Greater Manchester, but across the country, to see Labour as diametrically opposed to their interests. So much is at stake. Obviously, who our future Prime Minister is going to be is essentially at stake. But it's this kind of story of our politics in one by-election, potentially.
Yeah, and Ameer, if Burnham wins, then potentially Labour can limp on for a bit longer. But if he doesn't, it's going to be absolute chaos for the current government.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the pollsters have called it the closest we've ever come in this country to a presidential election, right? Because it's highly likely that if Burnham wins, he will become the next prime minister, right? And we're in this slightly strange period in Westminster where Starmer is a lame duck and is trying to pretend as if everything can carry on as normal. But in fact, all eyes are on Makerfield because that is where the action is at the moment. I think it's also interesting to see how the Reform candidate does, right? Because they have plumped for a real local guy, a plumber, a former army reservist, And in many ways, it's the sort of person you can imagine doing really, really well. And it was, as Tom said, a seat that well over 60% of voters voted to leave in the Brexit referendum. So in many ways, tailor-made for reform, but then weighed against that, the fact that so-called King of the North, Burnham, has got a personal brand and presumably that will have some bearing as well. So it's really interesting to see what happens.
And Tom, there's already been some, quite harsh attacks on the Reform candidate. People trawling through his social media history, the usual kind of thing. What have you made of that?
To be honest, I think that has amounted to pretty thin gruel in terms of things that they could possibly take him down for. It's one of those things where if you read the kind of Guardian headline, The Stand First, you think, oh God, what has he actually said? And then when you actually get down to grips with it, things like kind of talking pretty spicily around the time of the Southport riots about illegal migration. It's things like, again, questioning whether or not people needed vaccines in relation to COVID. One can take issue with his positions on these things, but a lot of these articles basically amounted to Reform candidate says things we disagree with. There was even one hilarious piece on the Byline Times, as many Byline Times pieces are, which was criticising him for being someone who was amplifying misinformation during the Southport riots, which included interacting with posts by Nigel Farage and Richard Tice.
Party lead.
The leader and then, I believe, deputy leader of his own party. So this is what we're talking about. There's also this quite strange story which has come out of Searchlight, the kind of supposed anti-fascist, that he was Facebook friends with a sort of cosplay fascist politician. But again, there's not to say that they were best friends. The extent of that relationship isn't entirely clear. Was he a fascist when he met him? Who knows? But this is the kind of level that they're having to dredge up. And I think it also it speaks to a certain level of desperation. I think the decision for whether it was his decision or whether the party suggested very strongly that he do so to delete posts and to delete entire social media accounts has probably only added to the speculation to a certain degree. But I would be surprised if this was in any way going to sway the result, particularly for people who are minded to vote Reform. The idea that there's some kind of smoking gun here that would derail his candidacy, I think, is for the birds. And it's just cancel culture is all they've got left, really, even if they haven't got endless amounts of material to work with in this instance.
With Andy Burnham, there kind of is endless amounts of material to look at because he's been in politics for a long time. And I think the criticism that is sticking the most of him is that he's a bit of a flip-flopper. He's had about 10 different positions on Brexit. He's been asked to clarify his position on trans rights, having emerged that he thinks that trans women should be allowed into women's toilets. He seems to be all over the shop and goes with the way the wind's blowing. Would you agree with that criticism?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the latest thing he said on Brexit, just in the last few hours or today was we shouldn't be reopening the Brexit wars. But as you say, he's totally flip-flopped in his views on whether we should have another referendum. And, I think the problem is people used to say of Boris, he bears the sort of imprint of the last person that sat on him, right? And I think you could say something similar about Burnham. And there's just this sense that, he blows in the wind and, voters want someone of authenticity and someone of conviction, right? If there's one thing we can take from Farage's popularity, it's that's what voters want. They want a politician that knows their mind. And I do think that with Burnham, in many ways, he's the opposite of that. He seems to go with the flow and with the direction the wind is blowing. So that may come back to harm him. I mean, I do think, just on Tom's point, I think voters are over cancel culture. They don't care that this guy might have been Facebook friends with an unsavory character, right? And let's not deny that some of the people may well have been unsavory, but we're past that. And I think if the Labour Party haven't woken up to the fact that they need to win this by genuinely acknowledging the sense out there that the country is broken, then frankly, they deserve to be defeated, right? The interesting thing actually is both the Reform candidate and Burnham, in many ways, are saying that they are the outside candidate.
Yeah.
They're the anti-establishment candidate. They're the one from outside Westminster.
And vote then to get rid of Starmer as well. They kind of have the implicit message.
Yeah, indeed. So I mean, that will be what wins it. I think it's the person that can properly convince the voters that they are the most different to the current failed prime minister we have in number 10.
And one of Andy Burnham's ways of trying to present himself as different is through this ideology that he's calling Manchesterism. I've been trying to work out what this means, and I'm really coming up short, because he calls it business-friendly socialism, which in practice seems to amount to the fact that there's been lots of private development in Manchester, encouraged by the local council, actually long predating Andy Burnham's arrival in 2017. So not sure he can take credit for any of that growth. But the socialism part seems to be that there is a bus network under public control, not actually nationalized. It's still actually run by private companies.
Yeah.
And, I know we use language very promiscuously in these days, but if socialism means, you have essentially a northern version of TfL, I don't think that's what people would have gone to the barricades for in years past. I don't think there would have been a Russian revolution over the B
TfL
network
model of socialism.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's incredible how much that is trotted out. It's also incredible how Andy Burnham has, at least in the minds of the commentariat, managed to position himself as an anti-establishment outsider candidate. I mean, this is a man who was MP for 16 years. He was in Westminster for many years. Before then, he was
Cambridge.
Exactly, Cambridge.
Ran twice for the Labour leadership.
Exactly.
2005, 2010, I think.
Exactly, and failed miserably when he did so, because he had this reputation as insubstantial, a flip-flopper. There was a good joke doing the rounds on social media the other day that a Blairite, a Brownite, a Corbynite and a Starmerite walk into a bar and they say, "Hello, Andy, what are you having?" This is who he is. The fact that he has kind of tilted in a more soft left direction of late, I think, is more indicative of the fact that he's recognised that the base of the Labour Party is significantly more middle class and kind of a bit more leftish, at least on kind of cultural, quote unquote, progressive issues than it was previously. So you have to kind of make those noises in order to get those people excited. But the fact that we've seen these U-turns now, not only on Brexit, but also on the question of the fiscal rules, I think is a reminder that despite all of the projection that is going on as in relation to Burnham at the moment, not only will he fail, I think, to inspire the voters that Labour has been losing to reform, I also think he will disappoint those people, the sort of middle-class Six Music crowd to which he seems to spring, is ultimately in the end, because he is just Keir Starmer in a pair of jeans. Like, it's not, there really isn't much there.
Or a pair of running shorts.
Exactly. Oh God, the running shorts.
Tight little running shorts.
I wish I could have unseen that combination, but there we go.
And he asked for the cameras to be there, I'm sure.
I'm coming around the corner in 5 minutes. Yeah, that's all.
I mean, I do agree with Tom. And just on this question of what is Manchesterism, I mean, it seems to be just getting things done. And, Manchester does feel like, it's a city on the up, as it were. I think it does benefit, by the way, from the fact that London very much does not feel like a city on the up. And the fact that you're likely to get your phone stolen, and in fact, as I was walking here, almost had my phone stolen, does suggest that, there's a problem in London, and he benefits, I think, from being outside of that, right? But, that seems to be what he's about. And I think what he seems to be saying is that, look, I'm someone that can get buildings built, I can get trams running, vote for me for delivery. But it's still, it's a technocratic vision that frankly doesn't exactly inspire me.
Should we talk about one of the other leadership contenders is saying, if we can even call him a leadership contender? I mean, his polling is so poor. But Wes Streeting didn't waste any time after resigning from Keir Starmer's cabinet before calling for the UK to rejoin the European Union. Partly people might suspect that this is to throw Andy Burnham off a little bit, to get him to clarify his comments, to almost perhaps get him to say that he does want to rejoin the EU in a Leave seat. If that's the case, he hasn't fallen into that trap. But Tom, what have you made of this return of the Brexit wars 10 years on from when we voted?
No, exactly. Very close to the 10-year anniversary, isn't it? I think it's indicative of the fact that Labour has essentially given up on representing the working class. I think it's given up. It's finally come to terms with the fact that their new base is not to be found in those working class red wall or similar constituencies across the country, and that it is within the university towns, within the big cities, amongst the sort of middle to upper middle class intelligentsia, who are their new base. They're still a class party. It's just the class has changed. That is a recognition of that. I mean, Brexit was the thing which severed the long fraying tie between working class communities and the Labour Party. They clearly made their stand during the referendum. They clearly made their stand afterwards when they tried to overturn the result. And now this conversation about rejoin is another symbolic reminder that that's really where their heart is. to a certain extent, this is about symbolism and vibes rather than substance. I mean, the way in which someone like Streeting has talks about a customs union. I mean, no serious person in politics thinks that the Turkey model of EU entanglement is a positive one. Like the idea that you would just be a member of the customs union and that this would be, a positive economic vision for the country. But it's about what it symbolises. We're these kinds of people, not like those kinds of people who used to vote for us and don't anymore. And I think it's on those terms that it's probably best understood.
Yeah, I mean, it does suggest a party out of ideas. I mean, they haven't been able to grow the economy. They haven't been able to, even though there are many things in place that are a result of Brexit, they've actually signed quite a lot of trade deals, which is quite interesting. But it's almost like the EU is the last refuge of the tired, clapped out, lack of vision politician.
Yeah, it's almost a sort of, I think, an automatic reflex for Starmer that, I think he probably feels, warm and cuddly when he's hanging out with European leaders and posing for a family photo. So I think there's a little bit of it, which is that for Starmer. But as you say, I mean, I think, look, the frustration with Brexit for the public is that the newfound sovereignty that we won hasn't been exercised to deliver the things that they care about,
Yeah.
right? Namely, getting control of the borders. And so you have to ask yourself, if as the Labour Party, they have absolutely no desire to use the sovereignty that we've won to genuinely deliver things that the country wants, no wonder they want to take us back into the clutches of Brussels, because they just, they don't seem to have any desire to actually exercise democratic self-governance, which is what ultimately Brexit was all about, right? And you see this throughout the civil service too. I mean, frankly, we've won back control over all sorts of areas, but many civil servants, I think would much rather we actually just gave those things back to Brussels and let the European bureaucrats deal with those things. So, I think that's the problem. And yes, I mean, I did also make me laugh with Starmer's big reset speech. All he could really come up with was nationalising steel and a European student mobility program. I mean, it really was the sort of, the last sort of vestiges of the Starmer administration on display.
And it does seem that the arguments for rejoin are extremely weak. The economic arguments don't really add up. I mean, the UK has not underperformed its peer countries like France and Germany. Of course, it hasn't been stellar. No one would say that we're roaring ahead. Look at something like inflation. Actually, we've had less inflation than the EU since Brexit, or even trade. Trade has increased since we left the EU, including trade with the European Union, funnily enough. So it's not clear what exactly the rejoining the single market, rejoining the customs union, what rocket boosters of growth it's going to put under the UK economy. And I think people should be quite worried, actually, about some of the things that Starmer is signing us up to, where we are going to be rule takers and having no say in the rules on things like agriculture, fisheries, energy. Those are areas where actually we need a government to grab them by the scruff of the neck, where we are falling behind and they need serious reform. But instead, we're going back to the comfort blanket of the European Union.
Yeah, and the idea that the European Union would readmit us on the terms that we previously enjoyed is obviously for the birds as well. And also I take a bit of issue with the claims and a lot of the discussion that the public have completely soured on Brexit. There is definitely a degree of demoralisation, particularly amongst Brexit voters, because of the failure to deliver on, shall we say, the kind of broader vision implied in Brexit. That it wasn't just about the act of leaving, it was also about properly taking back control of your borders, properly reassessing the various ways in which EU rules and regulations had held us back and forging a new path. But Julian Jessup wrote a good Substack on this about the polling, because you look at the headline numbers, it's like, roughly in the region about 55% of people would support rejoining the European Union. But if you really dig down into it, and when the pollsters actually put kind of specific questions to people, you get very different results. For instance, if I think this was more in common, asked voters, do you want kind of freer trade with the European Union? Practically everyone says yes. Most Brexiteers would say yes, given the obstacles that were needlessly put in the place of trade by a very hard negotiating position from Brussels. But if you ask them, should we follow EU laws and regulations, it's a minority who would support that. Even Labour voters, it's something like 80% of them support rejoining the customs union, but it's a fraction, a sliver, I think it's in the single digits of them, who would support our tariff policy being dictated by anyone other than the British government, which of course is what being a member of a customs union with the EU would mean. So you layer on top of that the fact that Eurozone membership, who knows what else could be added into the mix if we were to go towards rejoining. The idea that this is a kind of clear-cut case, that the public have just soured on the whole idea, I think is just completely for the birds. And it would reopen all of those deep questions about parties like Labour as to whose side are they actually on. Because one of the reasons that they managed to pull off that very shaky but nevertheless significant majority last time around was they managed to claw back some of those Brexit voters. They're never going to get anywhere near that if they continue to talk about this issue, let alone move seriously towards rejoining.
Yeah, I mean, they were at pains to say that Keir Starmer said Brexit is safe in my hands, and they adopted the language of Brexit, talking about taking back control. Whereas if they don't do that, then of course, it's already been clear from Keir Starmer's Brexit reset that they're, willing to go back on that. And I think also, it's worth thinking about how much worse the EU itself is, as well as the terms we'd be joining. It has changed a lot in the last 10 years. And some of the debates we've been having around something like net zero, well, actually, we might be able to elect a government that is going to water that down. But if we were in the EU, that's now an EU level requirement, essentially. Or if you think about something like the Digital Services Act, which means that we would have online censorship baked into any European Union agreement. That's quite terrifying. And I think if we had that debate, then I think you see the numbers for any enthusiasm for rejoining dissipate, apart from among the hardcore Remain bloc.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think also that the point on economic performance is really worth stressing. Right? I was a Brexiteer. I was a quiet one because I was a civil servant at the time. But
Can't voice that.
Indeed, and I would probably be bullied if I'd admitted it. But the point is that I do remember back then I did take seriously the some of the fear mongering that the Remain side were pushing, because anyone who's serious about the economy and economic performance and wanting our country to be credible as an economic power, of course, is going to be sort of concerned about some of these arguments that our economy would take a hammering. Actually, none of it really has come to pass. The growth we have in this country is paltry, but Germany and France are growing even more slowly. And actually, if you look at the data, Brexit doesn't show up at all in the data. It's basically invisible. So, yes, our economy is trundling along very slowly, and there's all sorts of things going wrong there. But Brexit isn't the cause of that.
And as far as I can tell from really trying hard to understand the Remain argument, it's basically, and weirdly, this is coming from Labour people, like Ben Judah, for instance, has been on a bit of a warpath, making the Remain case or rejoin case on Twitter. He's David Lammy's former special advisor. It seems to be that the economy was going absolute gangbusters around 2014, 2015, and we were on a path to basically not only overtake our peer countries like France and Germany, but to essentially be outgrowing the United States. And what are they saying? That George Osborne and David Cameron had wound up with the absolute model economy and we screwed it up, and we should apologize to Mr. Osborne or something. I just don't buy it. That wasn't true.
Yeah. The argument doesn't frankly make sense, but there's all sorts of things that are just left unsaid by those pushing for us to rejoin. I mean, for example, the £25 billion or so that we would need to contribute to the EU budget. Where is that money going to come from? I mean, as it is, the gilt markets are having a meltdown at the level of debt we have in this country. So I don't think we can borrow that money. So what public services are they going to cut to pay for it, right? And none of those questions are being answered at the moment. So I think fundamentally it's quite an unserious position.
So let's talk about HS2, the UK's high-speed rail link between London and Birmingham. Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, has revealed that in order to make it work, the trains are not going to be running until 2036 at the very earliest. It will cost £103 billion in total, and that's even despite the fact it's not going to go to Leeds and Manchester anymore. And also the trains are going to have to go slower, I think, around 20 miles an hour or 20 kilometers an hour slower, in order to make it cost effective, or just about. I mean, this has to be one of the biggest government procurement, government infrastructure catastrophes of our lifetime in history, possibly in the world. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm really angry about this because, there's a litany of government delivery failures and infrastructure projects that have gone wrong. But I really do think this one takes the biscuit. I mean, it's costing us, according to the Times, almost £16,000 an inch to build this thing. I mean, it would be cheaper if they gold plated it. I mean, and it's totally mad. And I looked at the costings of the Artemis program. The NASA mission to get men back on the moon. That costs less than HS2, quite significantly less. So this must be the most expensive country in the world to deliver infrastructure. And we all know the reasons why. It's the insane environmental regulations and the planning delays. The number of infrastructure projects in this country that are now taken to judicial review because they apparently contravene the Climate Change Act. Many of these then get thrown out by the courts. So and indeed, someone sensible looking at it would know from the start they always are going to be thrown out by the courts. But nonetheless, the fact that they have to go to the courts causes endless delays. I think Hinkley Point C and Sizewell C have been delayed by 1,000 days. That's almost 3 years by these endless appeals to the courts. So it's not just about HS2, it's about infrastructure more broadly. But HS2 really is just, the worst example of it.
But more expensive to go to Birmingham than to the moon is, I think.
No, exactly.
Really puts
In
the
a
icing
sense,
on
no,
it.
it's very true. And this is the thing, especially because all you have to do is look at our near neighbours, with if we're talking about learning from our continental cousins, and realise that our rail projects are coming in, road and rail, I believe, like on average 8 times more expensive. Like, what is it that is so different about Britain that means we couldn't possibly pull this off? And it's getting to the point where almost like delivering HS2 in some form, even at exorbitant cost, is important just to prove that we can do it in one way, shape or form. Like the fact that we can't have a second high-speed rail network, we can't build another runway. We can build a railway bridge at that railway station in Berkshire, but it's going to be 10 times as much as they thought it was going to be and take longer to build than the Empire State Building did. Like all of these examples that proliferate on a daily basis for all the reasons that everyone knows but no one ever does anything about. It's infuriating. But then you just get up, just find yourself in a kind of, I think there's an acquiescence to this now, just a assumption that things could never really be any different, because once again successive governments have struggled to do what they know has to be done in relation to planning or environmental regulations or what have you, but aren't willing to wind up, whether it's the environmental NGOs, constituents in certain places, NIMBYism more broadly. So we're just left with this. But I really can't see this changing, certainly under Labour.
To Tom's point about needing to deliver it, I mean, one of the other things Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, said this week is now scrapping it will cost us as much as actually delivering it. So it's like being in a sort of waking nightmare where we have no choice but to spend these insane amounts of money. And I think, it's unfair to blame any one person, and it's certainly unfair to blame Heidi Alexander for all of this, because many people have screwed up. But I did look at her biography, and I first saw that she was a deputy mayor for transport under Sadiq Khan and thought, well, actually, here maybe is someone who's got a bit of domain expertise. She's worked on transport before and she's now the transport secretary. But then I looked at her priorities, and one of them was delivering Crossrail, and Crossrail opened 4 years late, and the other one was getting Hammersmith Bridge to reopen, and that let's see where are we with that? It's still closed. So she doesn't exactly have a track record that inspires confidence in terms of delivering these transport projects.
And it is as you said, it's much more to do with the system. Even if you had someone brilliant, it would be very difficult to work around the planning system, the environmental regulations, the lobbying. I mean, to give an indication of how fierce some of the environmental activists, how fierce their opposition is to basically building everything. I mean, the government has proposed, weakening of judicial review, because even the Labour government realised this has all gone too far. And George Monbiot, eco-activist, friend of the show, was on the radio today, and he described it as akin to rape. And this is the level of hysteria that we're dealing with. But you'd say to these people, shut up, you're mental, stop it, we're going to build our bridge, or we're going to build a railway. Why do we have to listen to this? Is complete insanity.
And I think we are a nature-loving nation, and I think, frankly, that's been taken advantage of by many of these environmental lunatics. We end up with £100 million bat tunnel and the fish disco.
Yeah.
I think because instinctively people in this country do care about nature and they do want to look after it. But I think any reasonable person can now see we are just essentially being taken for a ride.
Absolutely. And yeah, we should explain the fish disco, I guess. So this idea, is it Sizewell or Hinkley Point C, one of the nuclear power plants? There's a fear that fish, not even an endangered species of fish, but some fish might accidentally swim into the reactor, and it's quite grim. They might be boiled alive essentially because it heats up the water. But the cost per fish saved is that, I mean, I think that you said it's 100 million for the fish disco or something like that, and the cost per fish saved.
The idea is that you blast
extraordinary.
this, not music per se.
No,
I don't think it's gone that bad, but to
vibration
It's rather-
thumping.
We are willing to expend
diverts the fish.
cash on fish that we would never expend in this country on human beings.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we have to, spend per person in this country on fish may well exceed spend per citizen.
Certainly more than the NHS deems worthy of saving a human being's life. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Ameer. And thank you to everyone at home. But that is not all, because we have Spike Podcast Unlocked coming up for subscribers.
They're just now too beholden to the lanyard class that are now a key block of their voting coalition. They can't do anything to upset the civil servants.
We're going to talk to Ameer about what it's like to be in the civil service. So you'll get a look inside Whitehall, inside the world of the blob that we talk so much about. So see you there. Thank you so much for watching the Spike Podcast. We'll be back next week. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the Spike Podcast, then why not check out what else our channel has to offer, from our documentaries to our weekly interviews and podcasts like The Brendan O'Neill Show. And if you're a Spike supporter, you can watch the second half of this episode by logging in on the Spike website. If you're not yet a Spike supporter, then why not sign up now? You'll get unlimited access to the website, ad-free reading, discounted tickets to our events, and so much more. So become a Spike supporter today by going to spiked-online.com/support. That's spiked-online.com/support.